Thank you. We move to question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When I last asked the First Minister about the Scottish Government's oversight of publicly owned Prestwick Airport, she told me very clearly that the Government had had no discussions about the relationship between the airport and the Trump organisation. Well, thanks to the work of the Guardian newspaper, we now know that such discussions had taken place, with the Government's own transport agency lobbying ministers to meet with Trump's representatives and the airport being marketed as the staging post for Trump's business. But we also know that the concerns about this public asset go far deeper than that. A contractual relationship with the US military involving the servicing of aircraft on active missions. This at a time when the US has been involved in airstrikes in Syria, which the First Minister vocally opposed. The Scottish Government must take responsibility for the use of its own property in this way. So can the First Minister tell us, and if she doesn't know, will she urgently find out and report back to Parliament how many military strikes have been facilitated by Prestwick Airport and its relationship with the US military?
First Minister.
Well, what I said to Patrick Harvey the last time he raised this question in Parliament was absolutely correct. I mean, there are two key so-called revelations at the heart of the story. The first is that ministers somehow lobbied Trump on behalf of Prestwick Airport, and that is based on the fact that Transport Scotland, back in early 2015, when just incidentally, that was way before Trump was even a candidate for president, let alone president, but they passed on a request from Prestwick for ministers to meet with the Trump organisation during Scotland Week in 2015. Those meetings did not happen. So that part of this story is categorically untrue. There has been no contact whatsoever by the Scottish Government or Transport Scotland with the US military, with the Trump organisation or with Trump Turnberry in relation to Prestwick Airport. The second part of the so-called revelations is that Prestwick handles military flights, including for the United States. Now, I have to say that the fact that Prestwick Airport provides fixed-based operations and refuelling facilities for military flights is neither new nor is it a revelation. Its strategic plan, which was published last April, talks about it. Its annual accounts, published I think in December, talk about it. Its website actively promotes it. And what's more, Prestwick Airport has been doing this kind of work for 80 years. Now, I'm not old enough to remember this. I don't think Patrick Harvey is either. But remember, those who are old enough, the day Elvis Presley touched down at Prestwick Airport, the reason he was there is that he was on his way home from his national service on a military plane that landed at Prestwick to refuel. This is not new. It's not a revelation. It's a load of bunkum.
Patrick Harvey.
That dismissive response is extremely disappointing from the First Minister. The First Minister denies that meetings took place between ministers and the Trump organisation. No one has suggested that they had, but the discussions most certainly did take place. And the First Minister should acknowledge that the government was aware of those discussions at the time. The First Minister also talks about the long history, an 80-year history of Prestwick. Prestwick Airport is Scottish ministers' property now, and that brings a new responsibility. Look, the First Minister and her colleagues have quite rightly challenged the UK government for refusing to step in when a business that it largely owns, RBS, fails to work in the public interest. Public ownership does indeed carry a responsibility for the proper conduct of a business. Yet this public asset, which the First Minister has said should be looking to freight and retail development for its future, now appears to be basing its business model on servicing military attacks that the Scottish Government claims to oppose and promoting the toxic Trump brand, which can only damage Scotland's reputation. Full disclosure is now needed, Presiding Officer. Will the Scottish Government now release all of the information it holds on this situation, with nothing redacted or held back by ministers or special advisers simply because it's inconvenient or unhelpful to the government? Will it publish?
First Minister.
We have published, as I understand it, it was a freedom of information request submitted by The Guardian that allowed the story that we're talking about to be published in the first place. But firstly, can I just be absolutely clear, and I think Patrick Harvey's got to be careful to be clear here as well, there have been no discussions on the part of the Scottish Government, ministers or officials, or Transport Scotland with the US military, the Trump Organisation or Trump Turnberry. That is what I said the last time in Parliament, it's what I said in my first answer, and it's absolutely the case. Transport Scotland passed on a request from Prestwick Airport that was never followed up. The meetings didn't take place. When we were first asked about this by The Guardian, I think the suggestion was that it had been a request for me to do these meetings during Scotland Week in 2015. I didn't even go to Scotland Week in 2015. The meetings, the discussions did not happen. But in terms of the work, Glasgow Prestwick offers refuelling and fixed-based operations for a wide range of private flights, scientific research flights and military flights. These are not actually contracts, they're non-contractual agreements that are in place. They're the same type of agreements that have been in place well before the airport was in public ownership, and indeed they've been in existence for decades. This is not new, it's not a revelation. This is the kind of work that Prestwick... My mother's from Prestwick. My grandparents lived in Prestwick. We used to watch the flights on a Sunday afternoon. This is not new. And I had an exciting life as a child.
Very few televisions in those days.
I have to say, no grief. No grief. No grief. No grief that I get in this session of First Minister's Questions is going to equal the grief I get from my mother later on for what I've just said. But look, this is a serious issue, but this is work Prestwick Airport has been doing for 80 years. But let's come back to the fundamental point here. Prestwick Airport wouldn't be open right now if this government hadn't stepped in to save it. We want to get it back into private hands as soon as it's possible to do so. But it's open, providing employment for lots of people in Prestwick and further afield in Ayrshire right now because of the action this government took.